So first of all, welcome to the CASE OU annual meeting. I just want to say, for those who don't know already, that CASE, the Campus Alliance for Sustainability and the Environment, is a casual, ad hoc, but lively and energetic and committed group of faculty, students, staff, and community members that is open to everyone. And in fact, I meant to do it. If somebody has the link to our website handy, could someone slap that in the chat? Anyone is welcome to join the group. We have monthly meetings just like this one, and we typically have speakers or presenters. Again, it's a warm and welcoming and inviting and open group. And so if you're interested in joining, you can, thank you, Sarah. You can click on that link and there's a button to join, which really just means we'll put you on the mailing list and you'll be updated, and you are welcome to participate as much or as little as you see fit. We're glad to have everyone aboard. I also want to just say thank you at the beginning here to my fellow members of the steering committee for suggesting that students present their story map projects. I mentioned it casually to the group at one point, and there was a kind of enthusiasm about seeing the results of that. And so let me just sort of explain what these projects are about and how they came to be. And so first, how they came to be is that I am myself writing a book that's an environmental history of the Kalamazoo River and the oil spill that happened in 2010. And as I've been working on that project, I've needed to kind of visualize the river, to see its tributaries, to see the sites of PCB contamination and dams and oil development along the river and other things. And it's a lot to keep in one's head. And it occurred to me at a certain point that it would be very helpful for me to have a kind of map of all of that stuff. And so I started fiddling around with ArcGIS software and its story map capabilities. And it occurred to me that it could be a really cool and useful and interesting tool in the classroom. And so this semester, I'm teaching two courses that are different but related. One is a course on postcolonial literature, which is not at all my field of expertise, but I'm teaching it with a focus on extraction, which is an area in which I have some measure of knowledge. And so it occurred to me that it might be interesting, given the kind of geographical spatial focus of a course, both in terms of colonial pathways, but also in terms of the long history of extractive exploitation and environmental degradation at these places, that if we could find ways to sort of see and visualize that. And so in that course, we're reading literary texts from 5 main regions, India and Nigeria and Canada and Ecuador and the Caribbean. And so students are divided into groups, each of which has one of those nations or regions, and they are working collaboratively on story maps, as you'll see. One thing that's sort of interesting and complicated about that assignment is that it is not just collaborative within the groups, it is also collaborative for the entire class. So we have one giant map that everybody is working on. And one of the things, if you're interested in ArcGIS software, one of the primary kind of technical challenges that we've had is sort of figuring out how everybody can work on one map at the same time without getting in each other's ways. And what we've learned is it causes certain kinds of complications, one of which I think one of the groups sort of ran into today, but I think it's resolved enough that we're going to be fine. Right, Ali, are we okay? Yeah, okay. Okay, that's all right. Okay, and so then the second class is a brand new class that we're teaching for the first time in the department. It's a new offering, just a course on literature and the environment. And one of the things about that course that I wanted to emphasize was a kind of bioregional sensibilities, that we were thinking broadly about intersections between literature and relations between the human and non-human world, but also thinking locally and regionally. And so for this assignment, I simply asked students to choose a place locally in Michigan that they care about and that means something to them, and to produce a story map that tells a kind of environmental history or an environmental story about that location. And so we have 4 presentations today. 2 groups are presenting from the Postcolonial Extraction class, and then 2 individuals are presenting from the Literature and Environment class. And I think that maybe the way to do this, since there's so many people, rather than introducing everybody at once, I'll introduce presenters just before their presentations. And so the first group that's going to present is the group that is working on India. And they are, and you guys can wave so folks can see you. They are Mariah Brown and Sonja Wilhelm and Josh McNeil. And they are going to be the ones who first show you what our map in progress looks like, and they are going to probably skip to their portion of the map so that everybody can see it. And I just want to emphasize once more that these are final projects for all these students. So all of this is a kind of work in progress, and add to that the fact that I am no expert in ArcGIS software. This is experimental for all of us, and we're all kind of learning and making it up as we go, which I think is part of the fun, but also kind of a high wire act for all of us in terms of collaborative learning that's happening but what we're learning to use in terms of the capabilities of the software itself. So, okay, I'll shut up. Who's sharing who's sharing their screen? Sonja, you should be able to do so. Okay.
Okay. So this is what our map looks like so far for the whole class. So it starts with this image, which I believe is in Nigeria, of gas flares. And then Professor Insko wrote this little introduction, and then it gets into the sections on the pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial histories of each of our countries. So we're going to do India. So basically, when you click on this, you see, like, we did a little slideshow here of images related to India. And then this is like blocks of text on the different sections of history of India. So I'm going to cover the pre-colonial history. Basically, the quick and dirty of it is the earliest signs of civilization in India starts around 2300 BC. So archaeologists found a large area of urban cities spanning across about 500,000 square miles right around the Indus River Valley, which is in basically the border of present-day Pakistan and India. And eventually these cities were pretty much destroyed around 1700 BC because flooding and earthquakes led to the Indus River changing its course, and then that destroyed the cities. Then the Aryans arrived in India around 1500 BC from Persia, and they created a new culture of the caste system. And basically the idea of the caste system is that we have priests and Brahmins at the very top of the hierarchy, followed by nobles and warriors, then artisans and merchants, and then servants are considered the bottom of the hierarchy. And the key aspect of the caste system that's different from, for example, our economic system today is that there is no social mobility between castes. So whatever caste you were born into is the caste you remain in for the rest of your life. Then in addition to economic tensions, there were also religious tensions. So the Aryans were mainly Hindu, but throughout the pre-colonial history of India, we have the introduction of things like Buddhism and Christianity and eventually Islam. And then Islam and Hinduism came to dominate, which led to Muslim and Hindu dynasties competing for power. Then we have the Mauryan Empire, which lasted from about 321 to 185 BC. And this was the first empire that encompassed most of the Indian subcontinent. And then this was followed by the Mughal Empire, which came around the 15th century after some political unity had been established by Islamic Mughal emperors, despite the fact that they ruled over an area that was over 2/3 Hindu, which is like an opposing religion. And then eventually this empire fell apart due to lower tolerance between religions and subsequent wars that depleted their resources, as well as the arrival of European colonizers. These European colonizers then established the East India Company in 1600 in order to exploit trade with Eastern and Southeastern Asia. They also began using slave labor in the 1620s, but this practice ended in the 1770s. And then eventually the monopoly of the East India Company broke because of a loss of economic and political power in 1813. And then the company completely dissolved in 1873. And now I'll turn it over to Mariah to talk about colonial history.
Hello, everybody. So the East India Company, before it was dissolved, actually played a really big role in the colonial history of India. There were other foreign powers that were very interested in the same resources that Britain was. So the East India Company was responsible for recruiting several citizens throughout India to defend these interests in an army. The issue began in Meerut in 1857. The soldiers were given bullets that were lubricated with cow and pig fat. And this was a problem because the majority of these soldiers were made up of Hindus and Muslims, and there are a lot of rules in their belief systems that prohibit anything used with cow or pig fat. So what ended up happening is they revolted against the East India Company and started a rebellion that ended up covering the entirety of India. The citizens began to destroy the infrastructure that the British had built there. They breached prisons, they consolidated a lot of their weaponry. And while this was a really big rebellion, it was unfortunately unsuccessful. The issues that Sonja already mentioned about the East India Company, this was kind of like the final straw for Britain. They decided that they were not effective enough in essentially taming the people of India. So this ushered in the British Raj, and this is where we see it move from colonialism to really just imperialism. Because up until this point, Britain was interested in developing India as a country, and now it was just about ruling them and continuing to exploit their resources. So in 1885, the Indian National Congress was formed, and this was to try to bring some of the power back to the people and try to get out from under British rule. And initially, this was mainly consisted of people in higher castes, so it didn't benefit the lower caste as much. However, we started to see more protest from all of the people of India, and the British Raj just kind of doubled down on that and started banning public meetings, protests, and started imprisoning a lot of people who were participating in these protests. And that is going to lead us into what Josh has to say about post-colonialism.
Extraction of resources such as oil, coal, and timber in India started under colonial rule in the 19th century. The British used the resources of India to generate revenue. Resistance efforts against British colonial rule intensified after the British Raj murdered over 1,500 Indians for protesting the arrest of 2 Indian independence leaders. After public protests were banned, this massacre was a turning point and motivated a shift from cooperation with Britain to drastic calls for independence. Mahatma Gandhi became the leader of the Indian National Congress and became a figurehead of India's independence movement through his campaign of civil disobedience. A call for Indians to stop working government jobs and to stop buying British goods to damage their economy. The lack of monetary gain as a result of the civil disobedience campaign induced the British to end their colonial rule after World War II. After colonial rule ended in 1947, the Indian government inherited control of various oil fields in northeast India. These oil fields weren't the only thing the new government inherited from colonialism. The Indian government also inherited the epistemologies and ideals from the prior colonial regime. In the post-colonial era, the Indian government will continue the extraction of natural resources for revenue. And then Sonja is about to cover a site of environmental damage.
All right, thank you guys. So that was like the first part of our story map. And then when we scroll further down, we have this section called the sidecar. And here we have sites of environmental damage, sites of extraction, and sites of resistance. I'm going to focus specifically on Bhopal, India as a site of environmental damage as well as a site of resistance. So I'm not sure why the map is all zoomed in like that. But yeah, generally this is like the default setting of the map we have. And then here I talk a little bit about Bhopal and how it's considered one of the worst industrial accidents of the world, which surprised me because I'd never heard of it before this class. And basically what happened is in 1984, a factory owned by US company Union Carbide that manufactured the pesticide 7 released 30 tons of poisonous gases into the atmosphere, which caused the immediate death of over 15,000 people and caused long-lasting health implications for hundreds of thousands of others. And so here we also have like a map action where if you click on this, it zooms into Bhopal so you can see where it is in India. And then this is a video about the cleanup process, which long story short, there is no cleanup process. It's not cleaned up at all, pretty much. Like the soil and water around Bhopal, like around where the factory was, is severely polluted from the time the factory ran from 1969 and to 1984. And so toxic waste generated by the factory was dumped into the plant as well as around it. And this pollution still causes health problems in people that live in the area today. The government has tested the groundwater that's been poisoned multiple times. All of these tests have shown the presence of pesticides, heavy metals, and poisonous chemicals at depths greater than 30 meters and distances of several kilometers from the factory. And this is affecting communities that are nearly 100,000 people. And here's just an image of some contaminated groundwater. I believe these are people kind of trying to like purify the water to actually be able to use it. And then this is just a video of an interview with Indra Sinha. He's the author of a book we read in our class called Animals People, which is loosely based on the Bhopal incident. And it's a really, really, really good book. So again, it's Animals People by Indra Sinha, if you're interested. And then further down, I talk about Bhopal more as a site of resistance because on the 35th anniversary of the Bhopal disaster in December of 2019, the people of Bhopal formed a human chain in protest of the disaster, which is still causing long-lasting health effects today. But there hasn't really been any compensation from the government, which is what the people are advocating for. And there are studies from the Indian Council of Medical Research that shows that the people of Bhopal affected by the disaster that their bodies literally contain these poisons, and that mothers exposed to these poisons are more likely to birth children with birth defects than mothers who are not exposed to it, but these studies were never published. So it seems like the government is still trying to hide it. And then this is an image from the protest. And now Mariah is going to talk about sites of extraction.
Yeah, if you want to scroll up just a little bit more and click on the map action for the uranium mine down a little bit. Yeah, there we go. Right. So this site of extraction is currently operational in Jharkhand, that is the Jaduguda uranium mine. It was built in 1967 and it is the oldest uranium mine in all of India. In the practice of extracting the uranium here, they dig up large amounts of earth, they pull the uranium from it, and anything that they don't deem as being useful, they toss into what is called a tailing pond. And this is a very common practice with extraction, where essentially they dug up land out of their hills and they just fill it with all this toxic material that they have no use for. So as a result, these toxic materials seep into their ground and end up polluting their rivers that they use for drinking water and their groundwater. As a result, there has been an enormous increase in miscarriages, stillbirths, children being born with physical deformities or defects, and the pollution of their groundwater has corrupted their soil, which is severely hurting their agriculture, which is a means of livelihood for a lot of the people who live in the area. The soil is also so polluted that it's been killing a lot of the trees that are located in forests that they feel are sacred to their culture. So it's affecting their bodies, their businesses, and their beliefs. So the people of the area actually went to the Indian government to see what could be done. And they sent out the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board to test the material that's found in these tailing ponds. And they found that everything that they were doing was well within the bounds of their environmental laws. They reported that they found nothing that was hazardous enough to be causing the defects that the people in the village were claiming that they had. I think it's really important to note that the company that is doing this mining is the Uranium Corporation of India Limited. So it's an Indian company. So the country of India is making a lot of money off of this extraction since the company has to pay them for the rights to mine, but none of this money is going towards the people whose land is being destroyed, essentially. The response from the government towards the people was essentially that they could either leave their homeland and move somewhere with better conditions, or to just live with these effects that they are claiming aren't real. They essentially just deemed that there's no evidence to support the claims of the people in the village. The Uranium Corporation of India has a 45 to 50-year lease in this area, so they will be mining here for a pretty long time, or until they feel they've run out of uranium to mine, at which point they are not responsible whatsoever for cleaning up any of the destruction that they caused. And they're also expected to build more mines in the future, meaning that this is just going to continue to be a problem. And Sonja, if you want to click on the green little indicator on the map over Jharkhand, that just shows you, it's a small picture, but it shows what it looks like, all of this toxic material being sent into these tailing ponds. It's just like a pond of sludge. And then I attached a video, and that just goes into a little bit more detail about the effects that the villagers are experiencing. And it also interviews some people who are advocating for change. So with that upsetting news, Josh can talk about a little bit more about some sites of resistance.
Could you scroll down to Assam? We're right there. Okay, so Assam is a state in northeast India. The exploitation of natural resources in Assam has led to ecological damage that has lowered the quality of living for indigenous communities in the state. Although media outlets have attempted to portray resource extraction as a form of development in India, many indigenous communities were left with a weak healthcare system, a lower quality of education, and a lack of basic infrastructure. And these are problems that they still suffer with today, which hit them especially hard during the COVID-19 pandemic. By the late 1970s, Assam became an epicenter for a number of resistance efforts. "We shall give our blood, not soil," has become a motto adopted by many protesters. During this period, the Indian government expanded their extraction efforts of oil and coal. There was a collective mistrust among indigenous communities regarding the Indian government, who were more interested in extraction than the living quality of indigenous people. By the late 1990s, armed revolutionary groups joined in on the resistance efforts against Indian state-led extraction. The protests escalated to abduction of employees, torching of oil tankers, and attacks on oil drilling facilities. Violent resistance efforts have created complex problems regarding resource politics. One of the armed groups are called the United Liberation Front of Assam Independence. And in December of 2020, they kidnapped 2 industrial workers and justified their actions by claiming to represent the indigenous community and their claims over natural resources. The group announced a ceasefire in May of 2021 during the COVID-19 pandemic. Later that same month, the Assam state government announced their approval of expanding crude oil production. This has caused fear within the state of Assam, as it is likely that further violent resistance efforts are imminent as the living conditions of indigenous people decreases and the exploitation of natural resources increase. And that's the image of the chief minister of Assam announcing the expansion of crude oil production.
Great. Thanks, guys. Okay, so moving elsewhere on our map, as we'll see, we are going to travel to Ecuador. And that group is, again, you guys can wave, is comprised of Ethan Berent, Ali LaBrecque, and Erika Head. And I am just going to turn it straight over to them.
Sorry, I was talking without sharing my screen. Here's our Ecuador, and Ethan is going to give us a little bit of introduction about the history of Ecuador.
All right, so I'm going to go over a brief history of the pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial periods of the nation of Ecuador. Civilization in Ecuador dates back as far as 8000 BCE and possibly earlier, the Valdivia being one of the first and notable populations. In the modern capital of Quito, an indigenous kingdom develops, which much to its later downfall is militarily weak. 3 major tribes soon established themselves in the region, in specific regions, the coastal, Oriente, and Sierra peoples. Their economies were largely based on agriculture, cultivating and trading between each other in maize and cotton, in addition to the capture and trade of fish, deer, and even gold. In 1463, however, the powerful Incan Empire took over much of the modern day nation and asserted their power. They would control much of the area until the arrival of European imperial powers. In 1531, the Spanish made landfall in Ecuador, in territory that had already been partitioned to them in the previously signed Treaty of Tordesillas, which split the world between the rivaling empires of the Portuguese and the Spanish. This treaty is powerful and that has successfully led to peace among the two powers on the South American continent. There is, however, immediate conflict between these colonizers and the established Incan society. The Incans do not submit to the Spanish and conflict ensues. There is even an account of an interaction between Incan leader Atahualpa and Francisco Pizarro, in which Atahualpa throws a Bible that was presented to him by the Spanish as a command to convert on the ground. However, the Spanish took power easily due to superior weapons and strategy, in addition to natives succumbing to foreign diseases to which they had no defense. The Spanish ruled with notable stability and unrivaled control, extracting primarily silver with the use of forced indigenous labor, silver which was used to bolster their then mercantilist economy on the world stage. Early in the 1800s, resistance emerged, as a revolution of aristocrats in the capital was followed by a bolstered participation in the Spanish-American Wars of Independence. They won and joined the newly formed Republic of Gran Colombia, headed by revolutionary hero turned dictator Simón Bolívar, before reaching true sovereign independence in the year 1830. After independence, political differences arose in the young nation. The conservative aristocracy in the capital of Quito was met with competing ideas from liberals along the coast and in the countryside. Under the rule of authoritarian conservative Gabriel Moreno, the nation made great strides in infrastructural development, such as building roads, hospitals, schools, and railways. He, due to his authoritarian nature, was not liked in the eyes of liberal thinkers of the country and was assassinated in his palace in 1875. Following the rule of Moreno, a wave of liberalism gained much popularity. Newly elected President General Eloy Alfaro was a hero of the lower class and established freedom of religion, allowed for divorce, and loosened governmental control of the media. The nation suffered a massive economic depression in the 1920s. Almost all of their agricultural exports declined in value as their currency inflated rapidly. This climaxed in riots and shootings, and several were killed. In the 40s, there was a brief war between Ecuador and the neighboring nation of Peru, which it then seceded 77,000 square miles of lands to Peru under the Rio Protocol after mass international intervention to resolve the conflict. In 2008, they ratified a new constitution, and as of 2010, have full ownership of all gas and oil produced in their nation. And today is a highly regarded tourist destination for its vibrant and rich culture, as well as its natural landscapes and beauty, such as the Galapagos Islands, which is within their territory today. And I'll now turn that over to Erika.
Sorry, I was gonna say, if you would like, it looks like the map did not save on your computer, but I do have it up if you'd like me to share. I know that's not the plan, but I do have the map if you want me to share instead, unless it just needs to refresh.
I'm refreshing again right now. Sorry,
Okay,
it's just
all good.
loading.
Just letting you know. And if
Thank
not,
you.
I can just jump on and share. Sorry about the... Oh, I might have to share. That's okay.
Okay.
Why
Here, do you
don't
want...
you go ahead and share, Allie?
Yeah, all good. All right.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I'm sorry about that. All right. Looks like... You could let me know if I'm doing this incorrectly. Can everybody see that? Yes, no?
Yes.
Looks good, yes.
Yes, cool. Can you see me scrolling or is it frozen?
Yep, we can see you scrolling.
Okay, awesome, perfect.
Thank you.
No problem. I'm sorry about that. All right. So I'm basically going to be talking about, obviously there's a lot of instances of oil extraction in Ecuador, but I'm mainly going to be telling a very specific section of that, and that would be Chevron versus Ecuador, which is an ongoing issue, which is why I think it's important to talk about, because I think it's one of the main instances of this in the country. So oil extraction in Ecuador began as early as the 1920s. At this point, the US was already very dependent on oil, as well as other countries around the world. And at this point, the US was one of the main producers of oil, but they were quickly running out. So at this point, they hadn't really taken root in Ecuador, but they were already kind of searching for other places to extract oil from. Because as mentioned, they relied very heavily upon it at this point already. And then in the 1960s, this is basically where they kind of took root in Ecuador. So Texaco, which is a subsidiary, was granted permission by the American government to explore Ecuador for its resources, and it worked with an Ecuadorian company called Petroecuador, and that's where they began their exploration of the land. And they discovered major oil reserves in the Amazon rainforest. And I'm just going to take you there super quick, and you can see Erika's going to explore the map in a little bit more detail, but just a little preview. So this is basically where they found a lot of major oil reserves, typically that of the Usuni region. We will also be talking about a bit later. And then in the 1970s, this is kind of where it picked up, even though it in the 1960s, it's kind of where it began. And so how has oil extraction impacted Ecuador? So it's impacted Ecuador in many ways, environmentally, socially, and economically. And in the beginning, it was kind of predicted that it would help Ecuador, especially economically, but it has had the exact opposite effect for reasons we will discuss. So environmentally, the landscape of Ecuador has severely changed since Texaco began working there and now Chevron. So along with deforestation, especially in the Amazon rainforest, there have been many major oil spills. I'm going to take you to a site of that real quick, which will also be talked about in a little bit, but just showing you once again how the map works. And that has also left, on top of it, obviously destroying the environment, it has also made the living conditions for the people in that region very difficult because they don't have access to things like clean water. And then just a little statistic is that 29,000 crude oil barrels were spilled across the Ecuadorian Amazon, of which 7,000 were never recovered from environment. So that's just one very concerning statistic, just kind of showing the breadth and like really how impactful this has been in the entirety of Ecuador. And then oil blocks occupy nearly 70% of the Ecuadorian Amazon, which is right over here, the Orient, which basically means that like about 70% of this entire region of land has been like altered or destroyed or impacted in some negative way. And these living conditions that these people have been like suffering with since around the 1970s have obviously led people to growing very upset. So now we're going to talk about the response. So the Chevron in Ecuador case became one of the most widely publicized forms of resistance against oil extraction in Ecuador. So Chevron, which inherited like Texaco, or I'm sorry, which bought Texaco and inherited its actions, was the one that was like facing against them in the court. And so the trial began in 2003 in Ecuador, though they originally wanted it to take place in America for extra exposure. It took 8 years for a court to reach the decision, and Stephen Donziger was the lawyer who worked with these people on this case. And in 2011, Ecuador originally won the case, and Chevron owed them up to $18 billion. However, they did not pay this. They said that this was a result of racketeering that they won the case. And so they filed a counter case, and it was taken up. So at this point, they still have not paid Ecuador back or helped them or helped clean up the land in any like significant way. So the people are still fighting to have better living conditions once again, and they have not once again seen any sort of like monetary reparations for the destruction that has been happening most widely since the 1970s. And we're going to talk a little bit more about certain individual circumstances, and I'm going to pass that over to Erika. And just since I'm sharing, just let me know when you want me to scroll, Erika.
Thank you. And to add on to what Allie was just mentioning about Chevron versus Texaco, the text we read for our class in the Ecuador book was called Crude. And Allie, could you click the green button that says Crude, a memoir? Like one of the cool things with this software is we're able to insert links. So I was able to insert a link to Barnes & Noble or someplace like Amazon where you can buy the book. And we were just trying to use technology in a way to show books, articles, shopping sites. You can go back now. Thank you. And I just thought that was a very neat feature of the map that you don't usually get in PowerPoint or Prezi. So we read Crude. It is by Pablo Farjado, and the book was all about the tension between Texaco, Chevron, and the Ecuadorian people, told through the perspective of Pablo. And he was the main character who lived in Ecuador, grew up there, saw the injustice around him, and really suffered. I remember one powerful scene in the book was he was talking about how the people around him were dying from disease and sickness from oil contaminating their drinking water and the water they used to remain hygienic. So a powerful ending sentence of the book we thought was, after 25 years of fighting, I'm starting to think justice is a fiction, a nice story to tell children. Pablo ended up becoming a lawyer to try and help the Ecuadorian people and bring Chevron to trial to hold them accountable. And as Allie mentioned, gain monetary compensation for all of the disaster and destruction they were through. But even at the end of the book, Pablo isn't sure that they are going to get justice, and it's still an ongoing battle today. Like we said, there has been no action taken, or Chevron was charged with a lot of criminal charges for exploiting people and extraction, but they were not held accountable. And a couple more links I added. Would you be able to click the link? Thank you. Is here's an article about the lawyer Allie and I just mentioned, the Steve, I think it's Diazlo. And you can read more in this current news article that was published in August 21. And I thought it was really cool that we were able to like implement the articles within our map. Thank you. Sorry, switching back and forth. Here are a couple images throughout Crude. It was a graphic novel, so it was different than just a regular novel with chapters. And I liked the graphic novel a little bit more for this circumstance because the images were powerful in the way that you were truly able to see the oil, see the gas flares in every image of the book that we read. And so that was all about Crude. Would you be able to scroll down? Thank you. And right here, I put a link to a couple current news stories in Ecuador. So here's a link for Quito, a landslide that killed 24 people in February of 2022, so just last month. And there was another link about how Ecuador was providing updates to the distribution of their vaccines and how the country was handling the coronavirus pandemic. Because one thing for me, diving in and learning more about Ecuador, I realized even though they may not have as much technology or be as developed as a country like America, they're still struggling with the same things that we are and trying to get through daily life. And one might argue we have it easier in America with our technology compared to Ecuador. How do you distribute vaccines to people quite literally living in the jungle in these unreachable places? How do we keep them healthy as well? You could scroll down. Thank you. And then here was just another website I found. The topic of our post-colonial class is all about the oil extraction and sites of resistance. So I found a website that listed oil and gas companies throughout Ecuador, and it also mentioned their location and revenue. So if you're interested, you can take a look at that. And then a couple points on the map. I'll be brief, but the first one is Yasuni National Park, and Allie just clicked to show us where it is. And it is made up of lush green trees and part of the Amazon rainforest. This is a park where there was like once a beautiful place, and now it's been taken kind of hostage by oil drilling and oil companies. So we were able to link another article to learn more where it says oil drilling article, and it takes you to a link outside. Oh, sorry, maybe that link got messed up when the map, our map disappeared, and Allie was graciously able to put it back together before our presentation. And so there's more sites of extraction throughout the national park like Lasuni and more throughout Ecuador. And here's a photo as well of the national park. We were able to add pictures and captions as well within our kind of essay style. And another site of extraction is the Ecuadorian Amazon rainforest. So it's located at Napo River watershed, which Allie was just able to show us on the map where it is. It's kind of cool. You're able to click what she hyperlinked and it will take you to the map. And this park was damaged due to extraction, which has brought pollution, disease, deforestation, forest fires, and the destruction of various land. All of this destruction involves the loss of rights for indigenous people. That's one thing I really like in our class that we get to focus on is how does extraction and companies coming from other countries and moving in and like taking their roots in Ecuador to extract oil, how does that affect the people living there and what can we do about it to help? So you could scroll down. I think here's another photo. And Allie, would you be able to scroll down to the section? I think it was called like, what can we do? It's at the very end. I didn't want to take up too much time with the map. So I want to add a small section of hope at the end of our presentation about, we know the history of Ecuador's colonialism that Ethan explained. We know Chevron versus Texaco versus Ecuadorian government and people that Allie explained. So knowing all this information, what are the next steps we can take? We can donate to humanitarian aid and relief missions in Ecuador. We can raise awareness in our communities at the state level, maybe lobby our policymakers at state of Michigan Congress or federal Congress. And we can also just be a voice for the voiceless by, like I said, lobbying members of Congress and raising awareness, because before I had taken this class, I hadn't known a lot about environmental sustainability, sites of resistance, and what to do to help the people. So I've really enjoyed learning about that. And one of the last things I mentioned was share resources and information on Ecuador with family, friends, and others. So I plan to show some of my relatives this presentation we're working on. And later in the semester, I'm going to try and link more resources because it's a work in progress for our map and it might not have saved, but add some links. So thank you for listening to our presentation on Ecuador. We had a blast putting it together.
Great job, guys. And before we leave the kind of global colonialist scene, I'll mention that when this collaborative map is finished, we hope that it remains out in the world, and so we'll be sure to share the link with the group, and it'll be available publicly once they've completed it. And so thanks for indulging their work in progress. So now we're going to turn from the global to the local and the regional with two presentations from the students in the literature environment course who are working on their bioregional projects. And I guess we didn't really discuss who was going first and who was going last. I'm going to arbitrarily choose Erin Sorensen, who's going to wave to you now, who is going to go first, followed by Paige. So Erin, take it away.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, So this is a story map about Crawford County, Michigan. Again, it's a work in progress, so it's not completely finished. Crawford County is a beautiful county located in the northern lower peninsula of Michigan that has 46 lakes and 22 rivers within its boundaries. This picturesque county has diverse habitats that are home to a plethora of flora and fauna. However, industry, settlement, and chemical pollution have threatened the fragile forest and aquatic habitats in the county, causing extinction of species and contaminating water sources. So I started off with the logging era, and the logging industry has an extensive history in Crawford County. It began around 1870, and it continues today, 142 years later. The logging operations of the past were different from the logging operations of today. They were not environmentally conscious. And currently, AJD Forest Products, the Chilean particle board company Arauco, and Asabo Souvenirs are lumber businesses located and operating in Crawford County today. Arauco is the company that supplies particle board to IKEA. And an interesting aspect about this company is they are more aware of the environment than their predecessors in the lumbering industry. They studied and surveyed the area where they built their plant so they would not damage or encroach the Kirklands Warbler habitat. They are more environmentally conscious about their logging practices. They practice sustainable logging by replanting the forests and take the forests that they take, which the logging operations of the past didn't do. So I'm gonna go through some of I did a little slideshow. So this is a picture of a mill at Grayling, and communities sprung up around these mills, and maps of the 1800s. Just a second, I gotta close some things down here. Okay, maps of the 1800s have recorded around 21 of these communities that have sprung up. And today, of those 21 towns that popped up, only 3 remained, and that is Frederick, Lovells, and Grayling. And Grayling is classified as a city, but it's really just a small town. And then there's 4 other townships. So this, in the map, you can, if you scroll over on the legend, it kind of takes you around, and I just have some pictures of the townships and towns on there. So this is the old growth forest that's located in Hartwick Pines State Park. And this is what the logging tycoons saw when they came to Crawford County in the northern Michigan. This is what it looked like in the 1800s. And here's just another view. And currently there's only 49 acres of this old growth forest left in the Hartwick Pines State Park. So this is what was seen in the 1800s, and this is what they left. So they just took everything. So now this is a little portion of the map. It's a little snapshot of the towns that popped up. Now DeWard, Michigan, it's up in the northwest corner of the county. And here's what here is where the town looked like. And this town had the largest operating sawmill during the logging era. And as you go through, I found a book with some old pictures, and this was what Frederick looked like, but it looks nothing like this anymore. It's about a quarter the size. An interesting thing about Frederick is it's located on what's called the spine of Michigan. I'll bring the map down a little, which is this section right in here where my cursor is going. And it runs the length of the state, and indigenous people used this spine to travel through the state. And then this was what Lovells looked like in the logging era. And size-wise, it hasn't changed much, but it sure does have a lot more trees nowadays. And this is the main street of Grayling, which still looks like this, but with pavement. And then there was this little town, El Dorado, that popped up, and it was basically a post office, and it was aptly named Jack Pine because it is in the middle of the Huron National Forest, which is predominantly jack pine trees. And the other town older town that I could find information on was Parashani, which is a very, very interesting stories surrounding it. The only remnant of the town is a cemetery, which is claimed to be haunted. So the story moves on. It goes into logging and endangered species. So logging and pollution and overfishing and the introduction of non-native fish caused the extirpation of the Arctic grayling fish from the waterways in Crawford County. So this is the fish, is an absolutely stunning fish. And this is what has been extirpated from Michigan. So, and what caused it was the logging industry and the damming of the streams and rivers. So they would do this to get the lumber to and from the sources. And also they would dump the sawdust right into the rivers, and that would pollute them and devastate the delicate aquatic habitats. So this is a different perspective of that photo, and you can see the water. That's just not, they dammed it up. And then the floating of the logs, and these logs were large, and what they did, they would ruin the gravel beds where the Arctic grayling lived and spawned. Here's another perspective of that picture. And then the overfishing of the Arctic grayling. Environmental agencies, I don't even know if they were in existence at the time, and if they were, they hadn't put any regulations on the fishing, so the fish was overfished. And this barrel is absolutely huge, and it's just filled with the fish. And so fishing had become an industry in grayling. And when they took out all the, fished away all the Arctic grayling, they then introduced non-native species, the rainbow trout and the brown trout. And these are fish from Europe, and they're very aggressive fish, and they were competing for the food. And they would overcompete the Arctic grayling, and then the brown trout especially would eat the grayling's fry, so it would never, procreate into more fish. So this careless treatment of the environment was responsible for threatening the Arctic grayling, and the introduction of the brown and rainbow trout highlights a time of impasse. I read an article. It was called Impasse Time. It was written by Mark Simpson and Imre Sesman in 2021. And they discuss the time of impasse, which they explain. We venture that impasse has everything to do with time in relation to how we think futures. And so that the logic of transition in energy systems, as well as in ecological and environmental sensibility, has everything to do with futurity and the modes of its imagining. So when the Arctic grayling vanished, the people introduced the brown and rainbow trout into the streams and rivers to populate them, to keep the tourist and recreational fishing industry alive. If there were repercussions that could damage the environment, it seems that the people here imagined these would be solved in the future. And that's the time impasse. So the solution to the current problems were pushed into the future, which brings us to people remembering the fish, the Arctic grayling in the streams and fishing for it and how plentiful it was. And now there's a connection between Michigan and Montana. So in the Manistee River is a river, I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit more, where the Arctic grayling lived, and biologists are making efforts to try to reintroduce the grayling back into this stream. And they're doing that with a success story from Montana, in where they have reintroduced the grayling, and it's been successful. So biologists are using the success here to reintroduce into Michigan. So the connection between Montana and Crawford County and the grayling reminds us that we are part of nature, and that what we have with nature is a relationship, and it's important to recognize human actions impact more than just human. And in grayling, they have a storm drain project, and this is a link to the information on that project. And there it is. Oh no. And it just tells about it. Go back to this. And all through grayling, you will find these decals in front of the storm drains. And it reminds us that our actions do affect more than just us. And our actions create a feedback loop. And the reminders like these decals put us into that loop. And then another thing that helps with reintroducing the grayling were fish hatcheries, not necessarily the grayling fish hatchery, but here's another link and it goes straight to their site and it talks about their mission. And just places like this, they help studying native aquatic life and how we can protect the habitats. And then it brings us to settlement. And settlement caused the disappearing of the eastern timber wolf and the Kirklands warbler through deforestation and fires. The disappearance of the eastern timber wolf occurred mainly because settlers thought the wolves were a nuisance because they killed their farm animals. And in 1973, both the eastern timber wolf and the Kirklands warbler were listed on the endangered species list. And these animals have since been delisted and are still protected species. So the story about the eastern timber wolf is not finished at all, but there is another aspect that highlights another connection with another area of the country. Here, it's between Crawford County and on a larger scale, northern Michigan and Wisconsin. So the timber wolf used to be in Crawford County, and now, for some reason, the animation isn't working on this, but the timber wolf has been seen in Douglas County in Wisconsin, which they came down from Minnesota, which is up here, and went into Wisconsin and then into the upper peninsula of Michigan. So there are wolf up in the upper peninsula of Michigan. And then we go on to the Kirklands warbler. And again, it's not finished. And this is what I started my story project with, and it just evolved into something totally different. But I was able to put a soundbite in of the song of the Kirklands warbler. And this sidecar just shows, this is the part of the Huron National Forest in the county. Another link which tells a story from their extinction to their recovery. And then here's when you enter into the Huron National Forest on Highway 72 East, you'll see this sign. And then this is pictures off of the Mason Track Trail. It's in South Branch Township in Crawford County. And these are the jack pine trees. And it's groves like this, where the Kirklands warbler nests. They nest on the ground. But with the deforestation, there was smaller places. And then this bird here, the brown-headed cowbird, came into the picture. And it's a parasitic bird, and it takes over the nests of any bird, but in this case, the Kirklands warbler. And then the Kirklands warbler ends up raising the young because the brown-headed cowbird's young are more competitive. And there is one more connection between Crawford County and another area of the world. And it begins in Huron National Forest, and it goes to the Bahamas. And those young stands of jack pine trees where the warblers nest and spend the summer months, they come down to the Bahamas and off the coast of Florida. And this is where they spend their winters. And there is the connection between Crawford County and the Bahamas, and efforts in Crawford County that have helped take this bird off the endangered species list are being studied in the Bahamas, and scientists there are beginning to focus on keeping the bird's winter habitat intact to continue to protect these birds. And they live in this scrub area in the Bahamas and in all these islands and stuff. So I started off with bird watching, and it just evolved, and I didn't want to take the bird watching out because they have a lot of really cool pictures in there. And this is a link to some bird watching tours you can take. And they, of course, for the Kirklands warbler, it is located out of Hartwick Pines, which was at the beginning. There's more to this story. It's about pollution, and it's gonna revolve around Camp Grayling and Lake Marguerite and their use of PFAS and how that chemical, which it's used to put out fires is contaminated some groundwater supplies, and it's also polluted Lake Marguerite. So that's the rest of my story that I have to continue to work on. So that's the end of that one.
Terrific, Erin. Thank you so much. So finally, our last presenter is Paige Therrian, who's going to take us somewhere else in Michigan.
Can you see that? Is it up? Okay. All right, so the location that I chose to examine is South Higgins Lake, which is in the northern part of Lower Michigan. It actually borders Roscommon County, where Higgins Lake is, borders Crawford County. So it's a little bit similar to Erin's story. But I would say, there we go. Okay, so scrolling. All right. So it's only fitting to probably start at the lake's physical inception. So around about 8,000 to 14,000 years before present, the Lake Wisconsin glaciation forms Higgins Lake and the surrounding region. And this image kind of reveals the outwash plain of glacial moraines, the deposit and rogue materials, and that those buried blocks of ice shape the basin of the lake and form and provide an underground water source. Eventually, this glacial decline gives way to water basins and soil expanses in which various tree species grow. And then the curving shoreline of the lake is formed by currents and waves moving sediment, yielding an expansive shallow bay. And Higgins Lake measures about 9,600 acres with a maximum depth of 141 feet. But the higher ground of the shore allows for sites of cottages and campgrounds. So that brings us to a brief historical overview of human activity and exploitation. So prior to European settlement, the area now known as Roscommon County was inhabited by the indigenous Chippewa and Ojibwe tribes. But by 1836, Native American establishment is usurped by European settlers with the Washington Treaty. And upon colonial arrival, Irishman John Brink surveys the land and names the county Roscommon after an Irish county of the same name. And he names one of the lakes in the area Forgenson Lake. However, in 1852, a resurvey changes the name of Forgenson Lake to Higgins Lake, which has stayed to this day after Sylvester Higgins. And as early as 1870, travelers increasingly began to visit Higgins Lake for recreation and relaxation purposes, giving rise to its reputation as a vacation community. And in 1875, Roscommon County is legally established. So by 78, railroad construction stimulates industrial logging in the area, and those lumbering days required the construction of a dam to retain water for log runs, but the subsequent deforestation of the area eventually voided its necessity. However, by 1911, that same lake outlet that was obstructed is obstructed once more as a means of raising the water level in the lake. Finally, in 1927, South Higgins Lake State Park is established. So that would kind of take us to the state park in a little bit more specificity. So as you can see by this map, the state park is located in Roscommon County on the southeastern part of Higgins Lake. So a few prominent features or locations within the lake are the campground. So the campgrounds boast about 400 campsites, and those go right up to What did I just do? Okay, those go right up to the beach. Sorry about that. Oh, little glitch. Okay, so the beach where yards of blue water are visible before it drops off into the deeper part of the lake. And so this is commonly referred to as one of the most remarkable or striking, notable aspects of the lake, which takes us to a popular activity of about the lake is boating. So there's a very nice boat launch where people can deploy their watercrafts and navigate out into deeper waters. And on the perimeter of the campground is a quaint shop to get ice cream. So that's right on this road over here. So all these places are kind of integral to an experience there. So the Houghton Lake Resorter remarks that a theme running through the park is memories that visitors make, many through multiple generations of family, which resonates very truly for me. So my family, the Therrians, have been, my parents, my grandparents have been camping there for years since before I was born. So it's kind of the first place that I was ever taken camping. And these pictures that I'm about to show are from about 2006, 2007. Okay, so this is kind of like the annual nexus for our relatives. And these pictures, I'm about 5 or 6. I'll just go through them briefly. Here I'm playing a little badminton with my aunt. Obviously, I assume I have a strong lead on her here. After dinner, we'd probably take a stroll around the campground. Here's my cousin dutifully protecting us as we cross the street. And we'd probably end up down at Nibbles. There's my little brother getting ice cream. And the rest of the time we'd enjoy down at the water, so you can see like a very distinct delineation between the shallow and the dramatic drop to the deep with the darker waters. So this is especially attractive when you're as small as me and my brother in these pictures, walking out just almost all the way to the end without it really getting much higher than our physical bodies. So another favorite area would be the playground before the beach, really an old swing set in a metal slide that, you know, the kind that burns your thighs when you go down. But I would say we eventually branched out to campgrounds throughout the years, and about 15 years later returned to Higgins Lake this past September. So this is me on probably that same slide, although I didn't get the opportunity to completely recreate the picture, although I doubt my brother would consent to do that anyway. And here's us at the campsite, and we would walk down to the beach, and my dad boldly took this photo standing over the water. And these photos that's from about midday. This is from the sunset. And courtesy of Erin Sorensen and her husband, these are some road signs leading to Higgins Lake and then to the park themselves. So those are all kind of a personal narrative courtesy of the park, which leads me to another sign that I saw while at the campground this past September was this one that says "Happy Little Trees Ahead," which kind of forces one to recognize the forestry aspect of the grounds. So the lake is obviously one of the main attractions, but it's important to understand what surrounds the lake is just as important. So in 1903, acres of land in Roscommon County are dedicated to forestry conservation, taking shape as the Higgins Lake State Forest. As residents realize that reforestation efforts are necessary to maintain the lush environment of Michigan, Higgins Lake becomes the site of the first state tree nursery established in 1904. And at this time, State Forest Warden Philibert Roth and his team recognized the land, which is devastated by deforestation and forest fires in the area, is in need of conservation care. So over the next 20 years, the team cultivates dozens of different tree species and hundreds of thousands of seedlings. And eventually the nursery is sending millions of seedlings across the nation and the state. So at the nationwide level, Roosevelt's Civilian Conservation Corps, I believe of 1933, manifests on the state level in the Higgins Lake Civilian Conservation Corps camp. So program recruits begin work at the nursery planting seedlings and fighting forest fires. By 1942, 484 million trees have been replanted in Michigan, which is about double of any other state. So today, Higgins Lake and the surrounding environs are heavily reforested and preserved. Happy little trees, indeed. Another sign that I saw when I was there is it'd be impossible for you to ignore if you're driving down or around the campsite or the boat launch in particular, the numerous signs urging the public to wash their boats and stop invasive species. So recently, the threat of invasive species has been a focal point of environmental concern within the park. So in 2014, the Higgins Lake Foundation installs the first Michigan State Park boat wash stations. So there are 3 boat wash stations freely available to the public on the South Campground as a preventative or defensive measure against invasive species. And these stations, as you can see in this photograph, include an array of implements to clean and dry your boats. So the use of these are highly encouraged to ensure that species like Eurasian water milfoil or zebra mussels are not still attached to boats when they leave the grounds, because they could be transported to other waterways or lakes. So while the boat wash is an effective method to prevent transmittance of invasive species to external waterways, the diver-assisted suction harvester or dash boat is a method utilized internally to remove invasive aquatic species, specifically Eurasian milfoil. And I tried to add a link here, but it just wasn't having it. So I'll try to do that in the next few weeks. But in 2012, the Higgins Lake Foundation purchases the dash boat, which basically pumps and filters these plant subsystems, which also negates the use of chemical removal agents, which would essentially harm the quality of the water even further. And last year, over 3,000 pounds of Eurasian water milfoil were removed from South Higgins Lake. So from the first, Higgins Lake has been a pioneering force for conservation, preservation. It's a landform deeply rooted in transformation. Its topography and geological features formed by overwhelming natural forces that endure to this day. It's a place of countless firsts in Michigan history that has been proven time and time again. Its ecological salience to Michiganders, centuries past and present. But most of all, it is a place that is as indelible as a Michigan landscape, as in the lives of those who cherish its existence. So I continue to probably add more links and advance the technological aspect of it a bit more, like my fellow students here. But that's about all I've got for now.
Great, thank you, Paige, so much. And thanks to all the amazing presenters. I'm very proud of you guys. I think across presentations, and I'm sure folks have questions, and we've got a little time. So if people have any questions, I'll open it up and try and watch your hands. It looks like Rhea, I hope I said that right. Go ahead.
You did. Hi, everyone. I'm sorry I came late, but from the presentations that I've seen thus far, they were just amazing, very interactive. I am a public health student or Master's of Public Health student. And so I have a question regarding Paige's presentation, but then I also want to kind of pose the question to the entire group. So this is the first time that I've heard of something called, actually, Erin mentioned something called a time impasse. I've never heard of that before. And I think that right now, globally, we're going through mitigating a lot of different time impasses because people pollute and need energy sources and do all of these damaging things to our environment, but we're not really considering the long-term health impacts and environmental impacts and social justice impacts. And so a way that it was mitigated beforehand, like in Paige's presentation, was the Civilian Conservation Corps in 1933. And so do you think that something like that nowadays would help mitigate the time impasses? So that would be the first question for like Paige, but then also to like, you know, any of the other students who've worked on these issues, because I think like, you know, students are the future and can help solve these problems, but we have to come up with creative solutions. So.
Yeah, to answer your question, I think that from all the research that I've found, the Roscommon County, the Higgins Lake area has always been kind of a site of, if not very early on, attempting to mitigate environmental or human activity, I guess I would say. It's definitely a site rooted in attempting, even before perhaps those impacts have become too negative or too drastic, to use different methods of mitigating, for example, invasive species, which have permeated the waterways. So I think that in that way, there's always going to be past actions, especially by humans, that are going to affect the future and most likely negatively in an environmental sense. But places like Higgins Lake have prioritized the preservation of those natural landscapes a bit more perhaps than other areas, especially in Michigan. That answers your question.
It does, thank you.
Ray, I just want to mention quickly, I put in the chat a few minutes ago a link to the essay Impasse Time that Erin referenced. If you're interested, it's really terrific. I recommend it to everyone.
I clicked on the link and I will definitely read.
Other questions? Okay, great, yeah. Would anyone else like to ask a question?
This is Julia. I don't really have a question. I just want to say that I'm blown away by the projects and the use of research. I'm a librarian. If you guys don't know who I am, I'm soon to be the writing liaison librarian. So that hasn't been officially announced, but I documented a list of the different types of research that you're doing. And I know I didn't, I'm going to put it in the chat, but I know I didn't get them all, but I'm just blown away. And so I just want to say that it's really impressive. And I hope that I can support your classes and your students coming forward as the librarian who's going to be doing that. And, you know, if there's anything that you're ever struggling with, let us know. On Friday, the librarians are going to be talking about supporting these types of projects as a group. So this was really informative to me. So thanks for having me and letting me share and see what you guys are doing.
Wow, Julie, that is amazing. And, you know, I'll just add, you know, CASE is an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary group. And so it's great to see that list of research there, the work people are doing in communities outside of universities. So yeah, that's really cool. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, Andrea says the future is interdisciplinary and beyond. Yeah, great. Is that another hand, Rhea? Do you want to ask one more question?
Yeah, I just have one final question. Like, I was blown away by the technology that y'all use to present the information. I have never seen, like, I'm so used to, as a Master's of Public Health student, but also as a non-traditional student, I've used Google Sheets, like, not necessarily, the PowerPoint, things like that. But I was wondering if you all could put in the chat, like, what software you use to present, because that was very engaging. Ethan, I don't know how to pronounce your last name. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, Ethan, like, I loved your group's presentation, and like the background was just very like organic. You had a lot of really great job of mixing like the stylistic component with the past, the present, future, and then having like next steps at the end, because I think that's really important. Like with environmental science topics, it can get very depressing. And so having like next steps and hope for the future at the end, I think is really inspiring to me. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rhea. And I want to make sure Andrea gets to ask her question. I wouldn't mind hearing one of the students maybe talk a little bit about kind of this experience in thinking spatially and geographically, because these are all English majors. And so this is kind of a different mode of presentation and a different way of thinking. And I'd love to hear you guys talk more about that. But I want to make sure Andrea gets her question. So Andrea, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. It is actually possibly related. A question that kind of might meld Professor Insko's question and Mariah's question, but it's about the fact that a few years ago I was presenting on a panel on eco-grief at a literary conference, and a climate scientist that worked for NASA in the area showed up to our panel because he wanted to talk about grief too, and he was experiencing grief because of his own scientific work. And so I would love to hear from the panelists about what was that experience like, working interdisciplinary, in that kind of interdisciplinary way, to kind of think about the possibilities of combining all of these fields with even your own kind of effective responses. Like, it is very difficult to think through these issues and to have them take up space in your hearts and your minds. And so just maybe, how did you find that process? Kind of toggling between different disciplines and then your own kind of personal responses to that.
Great question, thank you. Erika, go ahead.
Sorry, you were frozen for a second, but yeah, Andrea, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for all of your positive comments about the presentation. I've really had a great time and learned a lot in post-colonial literature so far. To be interdisciplinary, I was actually a communication major last semester, so it's my first semester being officially in the English program to hopefully be a high school ELA teacher. And I liked learning about different sites. I think Julia put the list in the chat of all of the different types of research we were doing, because as we were reading Crude, we got to learn more about policy when we dove into the legal aspects of Chevron, Texaco, and the people of Ecuador. I know we learned about the geographical location as we were putting places on the map. I honestly, this is embarrassing to admit, but I knew Ecuador was in South America, but I did not know where it was located on the map before this class. So it was cool to go like that Southern Hemisphere route and try and locate more places. And I'm just learning a lot about how places are connected as well. Like, we noticed there was a lot of extraction, particularly along the coastlines where oil is more prevalent. Or I looked at a map as well. I'm not sure how to describe it, but different oil rigs and like volcanic activity under the ocean. So I have been enjoying that, because as an English major, I thought, oh, we're just going to read the classic texts like Macbeth, Shakespeare, and other texts like that. But we've been doing a lot more and learning about the science aspect and just the history. I'm really excited to dive deeper as well.
Thanks, Erika. Ethan, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, speaking on kind of interdisciplinary work, last semester I was an econ major and I had just changed it. And one of the biggest things that took me away from that was this kind of lack of focus on the human condition. And that was really what I was interested in. Whereas, I mean, I liked the theory of economics, I liked seeing it in practice, but the reduction of kind of human beings to numbers that just make decisions was not it for me. And now switching to English and especially studying this has really, I think, been exciting. It's been something different, and seeing how it affects people on a personal level has been something that's been inspiring for me. So very happy with my decision.
I'm tearing up, Ethan. Allie, can I put you on the spot just to
Go for it.
in closing? Like, I mean, do you want to respond, Allie, just a little bit?
Yeah.
I mean, we've read, it hasn't been easy to read about the Bhopal disaster and about the devastation and exploitation in the Niger Delta. And, can you speak to the kind of, difficulty of that sort of emotional experience, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that definitely is probably the thing that I can talk the most about, because I'm very like emotionally responsive to media like this. Like I literally like cried probably reading every single one of these books at this point. It's very hard because typically I have not unlike Erika and Ethan, I've always been an English major, but really I've only read like the classics and stuff. So it's like, and that's what I love. I love that. But it's like going into this, it was very blind almost. So it's like I didn't know what I was getting into because I never read things that were like, so like strongly tied to like environmental issues and things. And it's not like I don't read things with like real world issues, but it's like to read something that just feels so urgent was very like difficult, but it was also kind of not fun to work through because it's awful, but it's like, it's very interesting to learn more about all these different places and to feel like, I don't know, like it kind of makes it feel more real in a way, especially because we also watched a lot of we watched 2 like films kind of talking about it. So just kind of putting into perspective these individual places and seeing what they go through on an individual basis has been very difficult, but also rewarding, I think, by researching it.
Thanks, Allie. Erin has a hand up, and then maybe a quick word from Sonja before we wrap up, if she doesn't mind. Erin, go ahead.
I just had to say the class, Literature and the Environment. I know this is the first offering of it. It's been an amazing class for me. I love how it ties the environment and science into literature. And I never really realized that before being a literature or an English major. I just really, I think a fire's been lit in me about the cli-fi. I never knew about climate fiction. And this class opened me up to that and has gotten me very excited about reading because I like grammar more so than I do literature, but this class has really changed that with me. So this has been a great class and I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Erin. Sonja, did you want to add anything to the conversation? And then Ethan's got to stand up and we should probably wrap up with him.
Yeah, sure. So I definitely think like the power of storytelling has come through in this class in terms of like its role in activism and in raising awareness of things. Like, I think that's why I love being, well, I'm technically not an English major, I'm a creative writing major, but it's basically the same thing. And I think that's like one of the reasons I love studying this is like seeing that storytelling and seeing how wrong people are when they dismiss that and they say that like, oh, reading is lame and like English majors, like they don't know anything, they can't like do anything with their careers. It's like, no, actually, I think storytelling is really where the future is going and it's what we need in order to, like I said, raise awareness and like do this like activism stuff.
Thanks. Ethan, you can have the last word before we let all these wonderful people go. Yeah.
I was excited to hear what Erin said about that class because just today I enrolled in it for the winter semester. So I'll be taking literature and the environment. And I just wanted to say that it was something like this topic is something I had never explored before. Like I've taken natural sciences, biology, chemistry, all of that kind of stuff, but I've never really studied the environment. And it's something that I've come to enjoy learning about. And it's been obviously a very sad process to see the realities of what happens in the world, but it's something that I've really, I think, found an interest in more than anything.
I'll be glad to see you again next year. You guys, thank you so much. Maybe one last quick round of Zoom opens. apparently my thanks to everyone for coming. Great to see my wonderful compatriots at Case, and I appreciate the support for these amazing students. They really are the best. Thanks, everybody. This will be recorded if anybody needs it. It'll be on the Case website, I think, at some point. So great to see everyone. Great job, gang, and I'll see you all soon. Some of you tonight, in fact. Okay.